Hello folks, here we are again for a mix critiquing or feedback video. So I've been gone for a couple of days on vacation and I haven't looked in my inbox yet. So let's see what we got. 20 mixes. That's a good. That's good. That's good. That's a good amount. Let's see if I can kind of accelerate my pacing here a little bit so I don't take too long and so people don't have to wait too long. This first one for today is by Divergent Studios. So the band is also called Divergent and the producer is Simone Petroforte. And first things first, in order to kind of get through it a little bit quicker so it doesn't take too long, I may just skip through the songs a little bit so I won't be hearing them completely from beginning to end, just so you know. Overall, this is also a really good mix. Just the low end, I would say, needs a little bit of clearing up because it's a bit undefined and kind of mushy down there. I think the rhythm guitars could use a little bit more filtering and just keep the low end to the bass and kick. And by low end, I usually mean about 100 Hz and below. And also around 100 Hz, make sure the guitars don't have too much going on because that can easily stand in the way of the bass guitar and make things very kind of muddy and undefined out there. The second vocal layer that sometimes comes after the main vocal layer could come up in volume a little bit because it's pretty far behind. It barely fills up that gap when the main vocals kind of take the pause. Yeah, overall this is a great mix. It's really just the low end that really could use some work in my opinion, but that's about it. And even that shouldn't be too hard. Just the rhythm guitars, a bit more filtering, and you should already make quite the step forward from that. Next one is by Ryan Clark. Okay, overall, this is also pretty good, but the low end also could use some more work. Now, low end is one of the more difficult things to really get down, so I wouldn't be surprised if I have to talk about the low end a little bit more throughout this whole series. What I noticed is the kick doesn't have a lot of oomph down there in the low end, so you may want to boost around 50 Hz or more. And also the bass guitar doesn't really... it could give the mix as a whole a bit more oomph. So also raising the bass guitar a bit more down there, around 100 Hz. If you filter the bass guitar, make sure you don't filter it too much, so it starts to sound thin. Just filter it to a point that it doesn't stand in the way of the low end thump of the kick. Usually that's not a lot. I usually filter my bass around 60 Hz, 70 Hz at the most, and that's already good. I think the overheads could come down a little bit. Not too much, perhaps 1-2 dB, just so they don't take up too much presence and too much energy. Of course, overheads add a lot of energy to the song as a whole, but right here it feels like they stand on top of the rhythm guitars a bit too much. The rhythm guitars feel like they are at a good level, but the overheads just stand in front of them that one step too much. The gent, yeah! But overall, this is also very fine mix. Just a couple of tweaks, it shouldn't be too difficult really. And you are also good to go. Next one is by Dominik Hrdas. Okay, for having a very low budget setup to record and mix this all, you did a pretty good job. It's not perfect, of course. I do have one of the other pointer I'm going into, but really, for everybody else, let me just read to you what he put in the email. So, recorded in a bedroom, no acoustic treatment, 40 euro condenser microphone, 100 euro audio interface, 200 euro guitar, 100 euro bass, addictive drums too. That's pretty much as minimalistic and low budget as it will probably get. And still, this sounds very decent for that. Now, what you could do, the bass guitar could come up in volume. For the style of music, you may want to have a bit more of a low-end rumble to really give it a bit more strength. especially considering the guitars are very much mid-range focused and don't have a lot of girth in the lower range. You really want the bass guitar to fill it up. And the kick drum could use a bit more top range click to cut through a bit more consistently. And I want to say something about the low end of the kick drum, but nah, I'm not gonna do that just yet. Once you raise the bass guitar, I'm pretty sure the low end of the kick will also fit right in. The guitars, or the guitar tone rather, I'm not sure. If they are stylistically where you want them to be, then leave it. It's perfectly fine if you are happy with the guitar tones. I'm pretty sure what I want to say about them is just my personal preference. I would rather give them more girth, a bit more, I don't know, something dirtier. Right now they sound like you used very cheap or old or free amp simulations. They have this typical quality to them. Well, yeah, I guess the rhythm guitars actually have this kind of 90s prog rock grungy feel to them, and they do that job very well. So that's why I'm gonna say, if you're happy with them, don't change a thing. It's perfectly fine. Overall, this is a very solid mix. It's just these couple of tweakers just to the bass guitar in the low end, and I'd say you're pretty much fine. Next one is by Yannis Brodas. Right off the bat, at this part, the vocals need to come up in volume. They are too far behind. I want to say the drums could come up a little bit, because the snare feels a bit drowned out at times, and also the overheads seem kind of far back. I guess for this type of music, I would personally expect them to be a bit more upfront, a bit more in your face. But if you raise just the volume fade of the drum bass, you may want to also watch out for the kick, but because right now the kick is at a pretty good spot. You don't want the kick itself to be too much louder. Now I'm gonna say it's more just the snare. It's just the snare that could come up a little bit, because at this section, now the overheads are at a good spot. So yeah, it's overall, again, just a bit of volume balancing, but otherwise this mix is really good. Also the low end is very well done. The bass adds a lot of that girthiness to the mix as a whole, but the kick is not masked. It also has a very nice thump that still punches through. It's all pretty well done. Just the vocals a little bit up in volume and the snare a bit up in volume, and I'd say this is actually pretty good. Next one is by Iarovoi Dmitrii, something around those lines. Okay, overall this is pretty solid so far. The only thing I would say is watch out that the kick and the snare kind of have that same level of presence in the upper range. Right now the kick has a lot of that click that really punches through and cuts through nicely. I wouldn't change much about that, but by comparison the snare feels a bit muffled. So the snare could perhaps use a bit more of that top range crack, somewhere around 2 to 5k, just, you know, sweep it around and see what really cuts through and sounds best. So in that way you make sure the drums also feel like a unit. Right now the kick feels a bit separated from the rest of the drums, and I suspect if you would just do that EQ move to the snare, then you would already get a good step forward. And I want to say the overheads could also be a bit brighter, but let me first listen on some more. Yep, if you would have vocals on the mix, then the overheads would be pretty much good. You want to keep a little bit more of top range for vocal clarity. But since you do not have vocals in here, then feel free to give the overheads a bit more top range, just a bit more air around 10k and upwards. So they can fill up that lacking clarity and brilliance in that top range. Okay, but otherwise this is also a pretty solid mix. Lastly, I would just say also work a little bit more on humanizing the drum MIDI. At times they feel a little bit robotic, so timing wise you want to make sure it's not all perfectly 100% on grid, and also play around a little bit more with velocities, especially when the drums are doing something very quick like polka beats or blast beats. You want to make sure that the velocities come down a little bit so it feels more natural. And also, let me check the intro again. Yeah, you notice in the intro, you put a couple of some extra sound effects. That's perfectly cool, but make sure that the intro feels a little bit quieter compared to what's coming afterwards. Because right now the song itself feels a bit thinner and weaker than the intro. Because the intro has a lot of frequencies building up and being very rich because of those extra sound effects. So you want to make sure those are not too loud, and perhaps also take out some of that lower range and lower mids so it doesn't feel too girthy compared to the rest of the song. Next one is by Jacques BLONDEAU. So he sent me WeTransfer. Okay, it's still good. I would rather recommend you do not use WeTransfer because they automatically delete your file again after I think 2 weeks, and I cannot guarantee or really say how soon I will get to your mix. So before the file gets deleted, before I actually get to it, I would personally recommend you use another file sharing service. Already love it. Okay, I had to give this a bit more of a careful listen, but one or the other thing I still need to give a careful listen. Okay, so overall, this is another pretty good mix. Just a couple of tweaks that I think could benefit this mix. The low ends, I think the bass and the kick could use a bit more frequency separation, because the bass can easily mask that low end thump of the kick, and so give that kick a little bit more 50 Hz and perhaps lower that same frequency range on the bass a little bit more, just so you make sure they don't stand in each other's way. And the overheads could come up in volume. And the chorus, you notice, they are there, but quite quiet. And overheads usually add a lot of energy to the music. So in the chorus, it feels like it is lacking a little of energy that you could get in by raising the volume of the overheads in the appropriate regions. But otherwise, I'd say this sounds pretty good. The kick could perhaps also come up in volume a little bit. But that's about all I can say. Next one is just a WeTransfer link. Part of your email says realm.ieguar. So far, this is a pretty solid mix, just drums could use some more humanizing. I think the solo could be a bit more upfront. In this case, I would say less reverb, more delay. Reverbs can easily kind of wash up the signal and push it too far back. With the delay, on the other hand, it will stay clear and upfront. Yeah, this is also overall a very solid mix. Perhaps the low end could be a bit clearer, but it's not really at the point that it's problematic. I'm pretty sure lots of people would very much enjoy listening to this song and this mix as it is, so I'd say good job. Next one is by Lunch Money Records. Overall, this is pretty solid. I would give the kick a bit more high-end click so it cuts through more. The snare, I think the reverb sounds a bit muffled and has too much low mid-range going on. You may want to add a bit more of a top range, around 4K crack to the snare, and also EQ the snare reverb so it doesn't get too muddy. And I think the kick perhaps could use also a little bit less, around 200 Hertz. You notice whenever there's fast double kick action going on, then there's a bit of a build up in that upper bass range. I kind of want to call it around 100 to 200 Hertz. When you lower that, you notice the kick kind of feels much more metalish, I kind of want to say. Yeah, that's about all I can say for this little snippet. Next one is by Logan Burstedt, and he says, how many mixes are you allowed to send in? Send me what you like, but don't overdo it. Don't send me 10 mixes at once. That's gonna be a little bit much. Because then for one whole video, I'd only be occupied with your mixes, and other people want to have their feedback too. Just send me 1 or 2 that show really where your strengths and where your weaknesses are. I think that would make more sense. The low end of the guitars need more filtering. They are quite muddy and strong down there. You may want to clear that up. Overall, this is a pretty solid mix. It's just a couple of things where you may want to watch out that stylistically you find a balance between everything. For example, the vocals have a lot of roomy reverb going on, while everything else sounds pretty much dry and upfront and in your face. You may want to take down some of that reverb so the vocals also stay a bit drier and a bit more upfront. And I think also the snare could use a bit more compression so it feels a bit punchier. And by that also kind of has the same amount of punch as the kick. Because the kick has a very nice thump and punch to it, but the snare feels a little bit weaker by comparison. So you may want to watch out that you get a nice equilibrium in there. Yeah, but overall, this is a pretty solid mix. Okay, last one for today is by Leon Grinberg. Okay, you sent me a Google Drive link and it just gives me a button to request the access. I don't know, I don't know what's going on here. It doesn't really let me download the file. So by all means, Leon, send it to me again, but use something else. Usually Google Drive works. I don't know exactly what you did here. If you shared it somehow with my email address, I would rather recommend really just copy the link in the top of your browser and send that inside an email. That usually works much better. But right now, I can't listen to it, I can't download it, so I cannot give you any feedback. Sorry about that. And that is it for today. That should be about 10 mixes. This is gonna be a long video. This is gonna be a long time for editing. Oh my goodness. Editing. Well, thanks again for your participation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm definitely enjoying this. I shall see you next time.